What is up everyone, welcome to another build video. In this custom, I'll show you how I kitbashed the Lfrith Aerial and Lfrith Jiu kits into a mobile suit inspired by Gray Fox from Metal Gear Solid. Let's see how I did it. The Lfrith Aerial and Lfrith Jiu are all great kits from the series The Witch from Mercury. These kits from the series features modern mobile suit designs with sexier proportions, excellent color separation, especially for being high grades, and excellent articulation. And no polycaps. With the more curvy design, I thought these kits would be perfect for a custom inspired by the Cyborg Ninja Frank Jaeger. Frank, aka Gray Fox, is a character from Metal Gear Solid. Why did I choose these three kits? Well, each has a design aspect I thought would be better suited for the slim design of Gray Fox. The Aerial's torso, which kinda looks like abs, and her shoulders, which has the better shape among the three. The Lfrith's head, waist, and legs are appropriate for the aesthetic. Unfortunately, her feet are too wide and flat. Therefore, I will use Lfrith Jiu's feet, which are narrower and more elevated. I will also use her arms and her thighs. Since these kits already have good design, I kept it fairly simple and only added certain distinguishing elements of Gray Fox's suit, or so I thought. Most of the panel lines I rescribed with my 0.1mm scriber to make them crisper and deeper. Light passes only. I also prefer to keep the angle of my scriber roughly in the middle of the two planes that make up a corner to avoid slipping off. Slow and steady makes clean lines with little bursts. Remove plastic debris with a brush or a toothbrush and then sand the surface to clean everything up. You only need a couple of light passes to get a good line that will allow panel liners to flow smoothly. For the feet, they already have a good cyborgish aesthetic to them, so I left them mostly as they are, except for this edge. I do not like how it breaks up the line of the heel, so I cut it out with my nippers and sanded the surface to make it level, which surprisingly brought out this nice little hole on the side which I think looks okay. To avoid rubbing of the ankle armor with the lower legs, I trimmed the ankle guard's upper inner side with my alpha blade. The added benefit is that it looks sleeker and less toy-like with the wide plastic before. The legs from the Lfrith has the right form but looks too plain, so I scribed new panel lines to break up the flat areas and also for color separation later. I used my SAB 0.2mm scriber to scribe new lines. Light passes initially until you feel that the scriber has made a channel that is deep enough to guide your scribe. Then you can add a bit more pressure to your strokes if you like. If you chatter or vibrate when you pull your scriber, try reducing pressure or lowering your angle. I cleaned up the edge with the SAB02, allowing the scriber to gently follow the line I just made. You can sand afterwards for an extra clean look. On the knee, I added 3 shallow holes. One on the middle, a 1.5mm hole, and on the upper sides, 1mm holes. I chamfered the edge of the holes for a more appealing look. For the holes on the sides, I also scribed a 1mm line extending to the outer edge. For the middle hole, I attached a 1mm rod in the middle with plastic cement, allowed it to cure, and then cut off the excess. I then sanded it to clean it up. For the thighs, I just added 3 holes on the lateral sides, 2 towards the front and 1 near the back. I also scribed just 1 line for color separation. I removed the bomb armor from the Lfrith hip and cut out the piece that held it. With some epoxy putty, I reshaped the backside of the hip by first putting enough putty to get the general shape I want. After letting it cure overnight, carefully trimmed a little off the excess from the sides first with my hobby knife before sanding it. I sanded the back to be flat, and I used a pencil to mark the general outline of the shape I wanted before sanding the chamfered corners. This way you know when to stop sanding. Now it doesn't look like the backside is missing something. I wanted to extend the abdomen to give the figure more length. I did this by first measuring the diameter of the waist peg, which was 5mm. I glued 2 pieces of polystyrene sheets. I was aiming for 2mm but I didn't have 1mm sheets. I did not want to wait and buy, so I used what I had, which was a 1.2mm sheet and a 0.5mm sheet, which adds up to 1.7mm. Close enough. Now to drill the hole for the peg. The biggest drill bit I had for my pin vise is 2.5mm, so after drilling that out, I had to use a more heavy duty bit. The closest bit I had without going over 5mm was 1/8" bit. I used that with my power tool to increase the diameter of the hole checking every so often if I haven't reached that goal. Once it was large enough for the peg to pass through, I glued the plastic sheets to the waist with some plastic cement. I trimmed the excess plastic with my nipper and proceeded to sand it down to be flush with the waist. The small gaps and holes between the sheets and the waist I filled up with some Mr. Putty. This is the first time I did any sort of proportion modification, but I think it worked out okay. The ab crunch was hindered by the top middle armor of the hips, so I had to remove a little bit off the top by sanding. Aside from lengthening the waist, the only other modification I did on the chest was to add a couple of new panel lines on the middle part of the lower chest. With the forearms, I sealed the 3mm hardpoint again with some epoxy putty. For the shoulders and the upper arms, I also sealed the hardpoint for the gun bits and scribed a few more panel lines to add detail. Nothing too complex because of the limited space, but enough to break it up. On the shoulder, the very shallow circular detail is very hard for me to rescribe. Maybe there is a way, but that's beyond the scope of my experience right now. So I settled using the God Hand spin mold to make a recessed hole. Chamfered the edge with a ball bead and attached a 1.6mm styrene rod with some cement. After the bond had cured, I removed the excess and sanded the surface. Now this looks much better. Moving on to the head. The space for the eye is too large for the Cyborg Ninja, so I decreased it by first tracing the shape on the lower half of the face with some masking tape and pencil. I taped that to a piece of 0.3mm styrene and cut out the shape that would be big enough to decrease the eye opening. I glued the pieces with some cement, and after it has bonded, he should now look like he's squinting. The head from Lfrith has bunny-like ears, so I got rid of that by cutting it off. The clear piece of the head also protrudes too much, so I cut most of it off. I will seal the new forehead gap with some epoxy putty. I also used the putty to seal the recess for the beam volcans. Since Lfrith's head is not that tall, I decided to keep the center mohawk, or the head would look too squished without it. After the putty had cured, I trimmed most of it off with my hobby knife and sanded to get a smooth shape. To the back of the head, I added more recessed details by drilling out a shallow hole and then making the crater with the ball burr. I used that until I had the spherical crater, which I then added a detail by using a hole punch I had. It made a circular line inside the crater while also lifting a bit of the plastic in the center, producing this unique detail. Since Gray Fox's main weapon is his katana, I got this sword from the 30-minute mission's Sengoku Army weapons set. However, I did not like the guard, so I cut it off. I also used some putty to fill in the hole on the side of the guard. I sharpened the tip by first making the end flat, gluing a thick piece of ploplet on it with cement, then trimming the excess with my nippers and sanding to get the final shape. After sanding the entire kit and washing the pieces, now we are ready for priming. With this build, I attempted something I've never done before. That is to prime the pre-assembled kit. Although I did not prime the whole kit as one, but instead sections of it. Apart from checking for surface imperfections, this allows you to see surfaces which will be visibly hit by paint, letting you focus on painting only those surfaces. With the surfacer fully cured, we can see nubs we failed to completely sand down and small gaps between our epoxy putty and the plastic, which is hard to really see on the unpainted surface. And that is it for the first part of this build. In part 2, I will be showing how I corrected those remaining surface imperfections and how I went about painting and detailing this custom. So I hope you join me again on that next video. If you enjoyed this build, it would be awesome if you hit that like button and maybe subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and see you all on the next video.